The debate over Common Core, an inside look at the standards applied in one classroom.
Common Core opens up not only how they see the world, but acknowledging different perspectives, and just multiple choice doesn't do that. It stops, right? Everything just stops at a correct answer, one correct answer, and that's not life.
Plus, a possible deal over Arizona's state budget, but it comes with deeper cuts.
The legislative cut is absolutely unreasonable on top of that and will damage the future of this state.
This is Arizona Week. Arizona's college and career-ready standards, better known as Common Core, will remain the same in Arizona classrooms. Earlier in the week, state lawmakers debated removing the curriculum, a controversial subject throughout the country and here in Arizona. Arizona Public Media was able to watch as one teacher applied the standards in her classroom. Here's more from Mrs. Callahan Dumont's class at Sunnyside High School.
So what do you guys think? Is that a fact or is that opinion? That in that time period, a white woman should not be kissing a black man?
Welcome to English Language Arts. This is the Freshman Academy at Sunnyside High School. Teacher Michelle Callahan Dumont is applying the Arizona College and Career Ready standards to teach the literary classic To Kill a Mockingbird.
If you can provide examples in your argument using these three appeals, your argument's going to be stronger.
I think it's logos, because he's telling that they never took Mayela to a doctor to give a diagnosis of what might happen to her.
A constant Q&A. Much has changed since 2007 when she began teaching.
That's a good point. When I first started, it was a lot of multiple choice and there's one right answer and that's it. And now it's more, okay, there could be more than one right answer. Can you defend your answer and how can you seek out that information and establish a case, for yourself? So it's less black and white.
And today, it's this.
Well, I bet at first they thought he was foolish, and then once they heard the facts, it's just like, that's a good.
So you think he's going to win this case?
Yes.
Challenging the students to come up with an answer and defend it.
I always tell them, which I don't know if it's appropriate or not, but I said, you don't want to be a chump. You don't want to be taken advantage of. And these are skills that, whether you're having problems with your landlord or, looking at contracts, looking at, lease agreements or, having a problem in a store, returning an item. We're building skills that are going to help you get what you want and, do it in a respectable way and a thoughtful way and ultimately, hopefully, create a positive citizenship in this community. There you go.
Skills that build their confidence.
Just being able to articulate why you feel the way you do, I think is powerful. Whether, it's at work or, in relationships, personal relationships. I think it's a powerful tool for them to have and develop.
Michelle teaches 2 to 3 literary classics a year. Without Common Core, she says, it'd be rough.
I think the challenge would be probably behavior, because we'd probably sit here and read it out loud, and then they would answer kind of lower level questions that wouldn't really have them really thinking or debating. And so it would probably be a classroom management issue where they don't want to read, they hate reading, it's boring to them, so it confirms that reading stinks. And I think now we started this To Kill a Mockingbird unit with them actually investigating about the time period. That the book was set in the 1930s, but it came out in the 1960s. So we gave the students a bunch of topics that they could explore. Black Panthers, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and they created PowerPoint presentations, which they taught to their peers about the time period, about why To Kill a Mockingbird was censored in some, in some states. And so that created background knowledge, but it also created some excitement in the text, and that got people excited, I think, a little bit more about the text. In the past, we probably would have just started reading.
Not here and not today.
The evidence is right or wrong.
The standards are a foundation in the district, A district riddled with challenges, but the culture is changing. Each student has a laptop to enhance learning.
Because she's showing anger and emotion.
The Arizona College and Career Ready Standards, Michelle says, breeds a new student.
Just overall, we're having conversations about freshman year, what college do you want to go to? You know, that kind of thing. We're already talking about scholarships at the freshman level. So that alone is, you know, a difference. And we used to poll the kids who's going to college or whatever. Maybe 1 or 2 kids would raise their hand back 2007. Now it's at least 85, 90%. And that's a big shift. College and career readiness, just having those conversations in general have sparked students to think about their future.
And challenges their way of thinking.
What? We still commit the same crimes as other colored people or white people.
The discussion, Michelle says, creates a vibrant classroom, fostering energy she had not seen before.
I think it makes school more interesting, and kids like to debate. They like to argue. So, yeah, it creates a little bit of life in the classroom, a little bit more excitement. And for them to know that there might be more than one right answer, you know, I think is just so powerful.
A teacher, she's face to face with the future and hopeful this curriculum stays.
Common Core opens up not only how they see the world, but acknowledging different perspectives, and just multiple choice doesn't do that. It stops, right? Everything just stops at a correct answer, one correct answer, and that's not life. And so, you know, I'm a big advocate for it, and I think there are misconceptions, but overall, who's going to argue against having kids think critically, debate, cite evidence to support their opinion? I mean, it just doesn't seem logical to me.
When it comes to Arizona college and career ready standards, lawmakers and even some teachers are split on the issue. Here's part of that debate from our sister station's Ted Simons in Phoenix at KAET.
State legislature recently killed attempts to keep Arizona from continuing to use Common Core education standards, but the issue remains controversial, and tonight we hear from both sides of the Common Core debate. Joining us now is State Representative Paul Boyer, a 10th grade teacher who is against Common Core. Also with us is Amanda McAdams, the 2011 Arizona Teacher of the Year. She is in favor of the standards. Good to have you both here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Let's get started here. Well, what is Common Core? Why do you think it's bad for Arizona?
These are a set of, and I know we'll disagree, but federal standards when 45 states have the exact same standards that the feds expect all Arizona students to know. The reason why it's bad is, well, first off, there are no magic standards. No matter what standards that we adopt, we still need to have excellent teachers in the classroom. The biggest problem is federal intrusion. If you look at the U.S. Constitution, the word education is not mentioned once, meaning that it's left to the states. They have no business being involved in our education system.
What is Common Core? Why is it good for Arizona?
There are a set of standards that we are holding our students to meet a certain set of skills at each grade level. And then I 100% agree, teachers make the difference in the classroom. The best indicator of student achievement is quality instruction. So our teachers have taken these standards, looked at what skills we have to meet, and then we have built a curriculum that is going to help elevate our students.
Critics will say that this was created by a group of governors, a group of politicians, not educators. Valid?
I was not there for the creation. I was there for part of the editing. I did get to see the first, second, and third drafts of the standards and was part of an Arizona coalition that got to give input before the final draft was released.
Arizona Coalition gives input. How is that federal overreach?
Can I go real quick?
Yes.
The business community also had some major involvement in the creation of the standards. My problem with that is the emphasis on vocation. I focus on, in my school, a liberal education, not in the political sense, but a freeing education. An education that helps students become a better person, a better student, and also civically minded, with vocation trailing third.
So, what exactly do you disagree with the fact that this has a federal government tone to it, that it's overreach, or do you disagree with the fact of what students are being taught?
It's more than a tone. It's federal intrusion into the education system. What I mean by that, so for example, I have a menu of assessments, House Bill 2180, that says that the state board shall require a menu of assessments, not the Common Core test or the AZ Merit test, which has not been field tested yet, by the way. So we have to get permission from the feds to say, we want to, we have a test that's more in line with our curriculum, so we want to use this test instead, maybe the SAT, the AP, the Cambridge exam, several tried and true tests that we already use. We shouldn't have to ask permission from the feds, and with the risk of losing $800 million from the feds if we don't use this particular test.
How do you respond to that?
Well, we went through a procurement process in Arizona where many of those same companies he mentioned were part of that procurement process, and Arizona themselves selected the test. So federal government wasn't telling us what test, we got to choose the test. Now, he's right, it hasn't been field tested, so my vote is still out on what will happen with AZ Merit. But we're talking about the standards, not the assessment. The standards are a set of skills that each student needs to reach at the end of each grade level.
Is the federal government, though, as critics say, dictating Arizona education?
No.
How come?
In my district, my teachers have taken this same set of skills. You could look at many states' standards. There are many in common. Talk about theme. That's a common standard. So our teachers have taken that standard and they decide what curriculum to build around that standard. No federal government's come in and said, you have to use this textbook or this novel or this story. Absolutely not. My teachers have developed that on their own.
How do you respond?
Well, it actually does, and here's why. Assessments drive curriculum, or a test. So as a teacher, I know that if my students are going to be tested on certain criteria, I need to teach to that. And since we can't dictate what tests that we offer to our students, it certainly is going to dictate the curriculum. We have a teacher shortage right now in Arizona, and we're always talking about what can we do to get high quality teachers in the classroom and retain those that are already here. If you tell a teacher that, by the way, on top of everything that you're doing right now, you're not going to have any autonomy in your classroom, and you have to teach this particular curriculum that is driven by the feds, we're going to have even a more mass exodus than we already have. But the problem is we still have to ask the permission slip from the feds to say, can we take this other assessment in lieu of the Common Core assessment?
Should there not be some sort of regulation and guideline involved when you're trying to get a mass assessment going?
From a state perspective, absolutely. The state, we are in the education business. We do determine what is and isn't acceptable as far as standards are concerned, assessments, and then we allow local education areas to determine curriculum. That's just the way we've always been doing it. We should keep it that way. We shouldn't hand over even more to the feds. The
idea that the feds don't know Arizona kids, don't know Arizona education, the diversity of a southwestern state like this is something that perhaps the quote-unquote feds aren't aware of. Is that a valid argument against Common Core standards?
No, because the feds haven't designed the test. We did a procurement process, and a committee got to select which assessment Arizona chose to make, and we will have Arizona teachers involved in creating items for that assessment.
Do you agree with that?
Well, I haven't seen the AZ Merit test, but it's my understanding that we opted out of the PARC assessment, which was a consortium of about 20-30 states. My understanding is the current test is another consortium, so it's very similar to other states as well. My point is it should be Arizona specific. I don't think that we're dense enough in Arizona that we can't come up with a test on our own.
Well, but I think the question also arises, what makes Arizona so special as to think that they can do a better test than what is being developed en masse with everyone involved?
Well, that's why my menu of assessments, again, it could be the SAT, the ACT, the PISA test, the Cambridge exam. I mean, these are all tests that we've been using for, in some cases, decades. We should have the freedom to do that if our curriculum is more in line with that. We shouldn't have the feds come to us and say, nope, you have to take this particular test.
I'm hearing federal overreach as a consistent theme here among critics, and we hear about this a lot. Is it a valid criticism?
No, it's misinformation. Again, the federal government did not select our test. Arizona did. And if we chose to work with multiple states on that test, I'm okay with that because our Ames test was a 10th grade graduation standard. And we wrote that test, and I think we have room to grow in our assessment writing ability by collaborating with other states. I think that's a great thing.
Do you think this is a step down, a step back from Ames?
The assessment or the standards?
Yes.
Well, the assessment, yes. The standards, I'm reviewing them on my own right now. So I actually adhere to the social studies standards. I teach literature and history, so I don't have to adhere to the Common Core standards currently. So I'm currently reviewing them right now, line by line.
Okay, but I guess my question, and we've had similar conversations in the past, if Red China comes up with a test and a standard that really works and is good for kids, would you not use it simply because of the people who developed it as opposed to the results it might get?
I teach the genetic fallacy and not to avoid that. In other words, you look at the substance of the argument rather than who is giving you the argument. But we still should have the freedom and the autonomy as a state. Maybe we come to the conclusion that, you know what, 75% of the standards we'll keep. We'll chew the fruit, spit out the seeds, if you will. But we should have that autonomy. We shouldn't have the feds say, and I have right here some guidance from the feds saying, if you opt out of the assessment, the one assessment that every student in Arizona has to take, then you're in jeopardy of losing all Title I money.
He's right, but we selected that assessment. It was not mandated by anyone.
By we, though, you mean the State Board of Education that jumped in head first on the Common Core standards.
The State Board took the recommendation, but it was a separate committee who investigated the assessments, and there were multiple assessments to choose from. And that committee spent weeks researching, investigating to select the one that they fit.
But the committee was pro-Common Core.
I don't know that to be true.
Well, I do.
Well, but if the committee were anti-Common Core, I mean, that would yield a different result. You wouldn't be opposed to that.
Again, I'd like to see the assessment itself. I'd like to use assessments that we've already been using, and let's see how this assessment, other assessments work out in other states. Why rush into this right now? Why don't we see the results? Then we can continue using what we're already doing.
Are we rushing into this? Should we take a more measured approach?
I agree. We need to see the assessment. I don't know. I won't know until we see the assessment how I feel about the rigor of the items and the rigor of the prompts that students are asked to write about. I don't know yet.
What I know is we were sold a bill of goods at the legislature. We were told by Common Core supporters that, oh, you can opt out of these standards. You can opt out whenever you want. No big deal. Now we're told, and in committee I'm told, oh, this is going to cost millions of dollars. Teachers have already invested so much time and effort. You can't pull the rug out from them right now. And then we're also told that, well, standards are different than the assessment, so it won't dictate curriculum. Well, again, it does dictate curriculum because there is the one assessment.
But with good teaching, as we mentioned earlier in the room, any good teacher goes above and beyond when the assessment is below where they want their students to go.
Would it be a good thing for Arizona education if, after all of this, Common Core were scrapped? A good thing for Arizona education, a good thing for Arizona kids?
I think there's a way to do this in such a way that is great for Arizona kids, and that's to have a review process of the standards and to have a multiple list of assessments to give the curricular freedom for teachers in the classroom.
Should districts be able to opt out, basically, and do their own thing?
No.
Why not?
Again, we had a committee that selected this assessment. If our standards go across the board for all students and these are the skills they need to meet, and we selected an assessment that's aligned to those standards, how can you compare districts? How can you look at teachers and students to know if they are meeting these standards, if the assessments are all different quality, different lengths, different content?
I think we need to put a little bit more trust and confidence in our districts and our charters.
It sounds like the districts and charters kind of like Common Core, though.
Not all of them.
Well, no, but...
A majority, 77% of Arizona teachers.
And you know what? And that's fine. But for the minority that don't, they should have the freedom not to. That's all.
All right. I think we got to stop it right there. Good conversation. Good to have you both here. Thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Other news at the Capitol this week, it appears state lawmakers are getting close to approving a budget, but it comes with deeper cuts to certain programs. The Children's Action Alliance, an advocacy group, is concerned with how budget cuts will have a far-reaching effect throughout the state. Here's my interview with David Higuera, the Southern Arizona Director for the Children's Action Alliance.
The budget that the Governor and the Senate President and Speaker of the House have agreed upon is it attempts to balance the budget on the backs of moms and kids, and that's really the bottom line, and it's a terrible, terrible blueprint for the future of our state. It doesn't support children and families the way our state should be, and therefore is not investing in our future.
There are about 16,000 kids in the system under Child Protective Services, or what used to be known under that department. Do you anticipate that services to those kids would be cut or changed in some fashion under this budget?
Well, I mean, one of the things that's changed just from the governor's proposal in January till today is another $9 million, I believe, cut from the Department of Child Safety. So a department that is just a year old is still trying to make that successful transition, increase the transparency, elevate prevention, all those things just got a budget reduction, and that's we believe a short-sighted move in terms of protecting Arizona's kids, most vulnerable kids.
And then we talk about education. It doesn't just stop at K through 12, it also moves its way up through higher education. What do you foresee there?
You know, universities and community colleges have been getting hit really hard by the state budget since 2008. Community colleges have been cut back 57% in terms of general fund dollars since 08. Universities, the three big ones, have been cut back by 37% since then. And this just continues that trajectory. And as students, you know, U of A students, ASU students, the head of ASU, Michael Crow, Eileen Klein, the head of the Regents, they've all spoken out and said, this budget doesn't make sense if we're talking about investing in our future. And they're all right. It doesn't invest in our future.
What is the Children's Action Alliance maybe doing right now during this process of watching things unfold in the legislature?
Well, we're talking with legislators who we believe are potentially no votes on this, and ensuring that we can try and kill this bill. We believe that legislators need to go back to the drawing board. They need to bring it out into the open. The community across the state has been really loud in saying this budget doesn't meet our priorities, doesn't reflect our priorities, and we expect legislators to listen to their constituents.
Economically, the governor has said that this is a good move for the state. How do you respond to that?
Well, he's fond of saying, and he said it again yesterday, that we need to tighten our belts and live within our means, which totally ignores the fact that in 24 of the last 25 years, Arizona has cut taxes or increased tax credits. You know, 1/3 of the projected deficit going forward is due to tax cuts that were passed since the Great Recession. And Governor Ducey, the first thing he said when he was inaugurated was, those tax cuts are not on the table. They will continue to be implemented, even the ones that haven't yet been implemented. That's a mistake. And so for him to turn around and then say we have to tighten our belts is just disingenuous, because we're continuing to give away hundreds of millions of dollars in tax cuts and tax breaks that have not yet proven to do anything for our economic development, but definitely have reduced our general fund, which supports K-12 and other priorities like universities.
What is the end result if we continue to make cuts to some of our most critical services, particularly involving children?
Well, I mean, to go back to Ducey's priority of economic development, I think we're looking at a state that not too many businesses would want to invest in. Why would they? You know, this budget proposal permanently reduces the per pupil funding at K-12. It doesn't meet what the voters demanded and what the courts have demanded. Sets us on a trajectory to continue to underfund that and be one of the worst in the nation on that. It continues to cut back universities, and all these tax breaks that have happened over the last 25 years and that are still proposed now haven't done what they were purported to do. You know, you look at the national job numbers this morning, 295,000 jobs created nationally, the unemployment rate down at 5.5%. Why isn't Arizona doing as well? And you know, we would argue it's not doing as well because we're not investing in the things that really matter, primarily education, and that's what businesses really want to see.
The Buzz now with my colleague Christopher Conover. And Christopher, a lot to talk about this week. Higher education went from $77 million in cuts to $104 million now.
This was the deal that was worked out behind closed doors by Republican leaders in the House and Senate and the governor. This is the new budget deal. And the big takeaway from it that a lot of people noticed was this cut to higher education. When the governor proposed his budget, $77 million in cuts. The university's not happy about it, but they said they could deal with it. Now it's at $104 million for the coming year.
And we should note that President Hart from the University of Arizona did release a statement this week where she recognizes that it's a difficult job that state lawmakers have. She went on to say that higher education provides a valuable service to the state and that this is something they will continue to watch and work with.
Sentiments echoed by the Arizona Board of Regents, who oversees all three state universities. Eileen Klein, the head of the board, had a very similar statement also.
And then this week you also got to manage some time with Rick Myers, the treasurer of the Arizona Board of Regents, and here's some of that interview.
You know, we're not cutting money from the universities. The universities, they're buildings. What we're doing is we're cutting money from the people of Arizona. It means that this state is not investing in each of our young people to help them to acquire more education, to help them to realize their personal potential. The state's not investing in the ideas and the technology that can help us start new companies and nurture our current companies in this state to build a better economy.
Okay, so moving forward though, what is the concern? Is how do we budget this or how do we manage this?
It's two concerns. A, how do we budget it in the short term? But as the Board of Regents and the presidents, all three presidents have been saying, what do we do long term? We take this cut now, but what are we doing long term on trying to build the universities as an economic engine and things like that? What did these cuts do? And that's the big question.
And Treasurer Meyer spoke about that and the economic implications throughout the state. Here he is now.
To me, it's all about competition. And if we're not preparing our young people for the jobs of tomorrow, if we're not helping to create those jobs of tomorrow through the research and the technology that we bring from the universities, then this state isn't competitive with the other places to live in this world. And we need to recognize that. That's what's important long term. Are we going to invest in ourselves so that we can be competitive and have the standard of living that we deserve?
Okay, so the other big news, a $9.1 billion budget. Here we are talking about this Friday afternoon. Unclear if we're going to have some resolution over the weekend.
Legislative leaders, and when I say legislative leaders, I mean the top of the chamber Republicans, not the Democrats in this case. We're hoping to have a vote maybe late tonight, get that budget to the governor by the weekend. But everything broke down this Friday morning. Some moderate members of the Republican Party started pushing back on the speed that this is moving, and even some Tea Party members started pushing back on everything from cuts to local government to the higher education cuts and just the overall speed.
Becoming a partisan issue. Okay, other big news, redistricting is in the courts this week as well.
Was in the U.S. Supreme Court, and the question is, does the Independent Redistricting Commission have the constitutional right to draw congressional boundaries? Now, we've used these boundaries for 2 elections, but the Republican legislature challenged that in the U.S. Supreme Court, saying that the commission doesn't have the right to draw those.
Okay, so more to come from that surely in the next...
We should have a decision sometime by the end of June is what they're hoping.
All right, Christopher Conover, thank you for your analysis and thank you for joining us. That's our program. Be sure to tune in next week as Southern Arizona prepares for the long-awaited Festival of Books. We'll also feature a one-on-one interview with a New York Times best-selling author and the story of a much older person who made the decision to learn to read later in life. All those stories and more again on next Arizona Week. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Lorraine Rivera.